This is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I'm the fellow who has a hyphen in my name. The hyphen is silent, but I am anything but that. Respectonomics is bringing you another episode of Living Dignity. Living dignity, as the name implies or says, it is to do with the dignity, in this case, of the human being. In fact, dignity describes the human being. My name is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley. I am your voice of Respectonomics. I'm your year of Respectonomics. And from both points of view, welcome both your input and your ideas on how we can expand and develop this theme of human dignity. If we look at a human being, we think in terms of vital signs, do we not? We think of the heart, we think of the lungs. If we want to know if the heart is working, we touch for pulse. And if we want to know if the lungs are working, we listen for breathing. In both cases, we're looking for vital signs. But there's another vital sign of the human being, and that is dignity. It is the essence of what we are worth. It is the essence of the value that we put on our own lives, and of course, the value that we place upon other people's lives. Without dignity, we would, in the famous Latin expression, we would be a sine qua non, which means without which we are not, meaning to say that without dignity, we do not have life. So life and dignity we would regard as almost exchangeable substitutes for one another. Life and dignity go together. And what is dignity? Dignity is a way of measuring and accepting the value of the worth of another human being. It's very easy because of all of the trappings of technology and because of the ways in which we find ourselves surrounded by so many people, you might even say because we are so populated, it's almost easy to take the human being for granted. Let me just give you one example of the miracle of the human being. Everybody's got their own definition, their own understanding, but it is time to pause and take human identification, not station identification, human identification to identify the characteristics of us as human beings. Take your fingers for a moment. Supposing you've got a piece of wood that you've sanded down because you want to give it a satin-like finish, and you've used a 00 piece of sandpaper and you've been working on it. And what you typically will do is not use a microscope or some fancy micrometer or measuring device. You will rub your finger across that surface and you will detect the slightest imperfection and bring the sandpaper back. Isn't it interesting that those same fingers are the ones that can grab a mallet or a sledgehammer and can actually destroy a lump of granite, a lump of ice, that can bounce off a piece of iron. Whatever it is that's doing, just think of the violence that goes with that sense of what the fingers were doing at that point compared with the fingers that would have been looking for the imperfections on that piece of wood. The fact that we have this kind of ubiety, that we have this kind of spread of what we can do is absolutely remarkable. That is only to bring to us the reality of looking at dignity then as the first, second, or third element of a vital sign. We've talked about the heart and the pulse. We've talked about the lungs and the breath. Now we're going to talk about dignity as a vital sign. If we think of the pulse, we say we're going to take the pulse. And that means that we are going to touch. Would you know we can take our own pulse? You put your finger on there we go with the finger, the sensitivity. You put your finger on your wrist and you can, if you listen carefully or touch carefully, you can take your pulse. And you can take the pulse of another human being as well. But here's the interesting thing. The physicality of the touch describes something that is extraordinarily deep. We're talking about the heart. We're talking about how the heart functions. It goes beep, it goes rest. But using our fingers, using the methodology of touch, we can actually feel that the heart is operating correctly or incorrectly. But either way, look at it this way. We can touch dignity. We can look at dignity as something that is touchable. We can feel its pulse. Let's listen to dignity. After all, if we look at the lungs, we think in terms of breath. We think of the lungs breathing in and breathing out. The pulse of the heart is beat rest. The strength of the lungs, of course, is breathing in the oxygen and exhaling the carbon dioxide. But we are listening for the dignity in that, listening for the breath. And the same applies then to dignity. We've talked about how we can touch dignity and we can take our own pulse. We can listen to our breathing. It is one of the most extraordinary uh, abilities of a human being to be able to sit quietly and to listen to one's breathing. It's a very restful exercise. It's stunningly beautiful. But if you listen to your breathing, why not listen to your dignity? Why not listen to the dignity of another human being? And if we're going to look at these things of the pulse and the breathing exercises, if we're looking at those two things, we would typically want to hear a very powerful pulse, a very reliable one, and the same with the lungs. You want to hear the lungs breathing in and out. You do not want to hear any kind of imperfection. But think about the lungs for a second. We can talk about heart disease. We can talk about how heart disease is for the heart. We can talk about the lungs and how they can be affected by horrific diseases such as cancer, and of course by COPD, which is a significant breathing constriction. But when we look at those, so often, whether you're looking at heart damage or lung damage, we think of how we have been exposed to contaminants or to toxins. And that's true of dignity as well. Dignity can be can be contaminated, toxified by anger, abuse, jealousy, ignorance, dishonesty. And when we think of our own weaknesses and the way we mess up, so often those are the very same toxins that can be hostile or inimical to our dignity. So therefore, just like we would say ways in which we can operate our hearts and our lungs effectively and safely, so we should apply the same to our dignity. The human being is based on a process of dignity, a process of worthwhile values, a process that you dignify the content of the individual to find out this extraordinary capacity that each of you and I have. So the question is, what are you breathing today? What are you touching today? What is your pulse like? And we believe at Respectonomics that the business of taking your pulse of your dignity, listening to the breath of your dignity, are cornerstones to the vitality of our humanity and our prosperity and indeed our hope. I'll ask you a question. Although this is Jeremy Wentworth-Stanley, and I'm meant to have all the answers, I do not. So I can ask the question, have you touched the pulse of your dignity today? Have you touched the pulse of the dignity of another individual? Have you breathed in dignity? Have you breathed out dignity? Give you one other clue. Dignity is free. Dignity is a currency. And rather than a currency that tends to get spent and therefore depletes the account, it is the most extraordinary dynamic of dignity, that the more you give, the more you get. The more you get, the more you have to give. Have you taken your pulse today of dignity? Have you breathed dignity?